And long for me is each hour new-born, stricken forlorn and smit with grief, for the hunting lands and the Fenian bands and the long-haired, generous Fenian chief. I hear no music, I find no feast, I slay no beast from a bounding steed. I bestow no gold, I am poor and old, I am sick and cold, without wine or mead. If you know anything about Irish folklore and mythology, then chances are you've heard of Finn McCool and how the Giant's Causeway came to be. But Finn had a son named Ossian, and while thousands of visitors flock to see the Giant's Causeway right now, there's a site connected with Ossian that very few people know about. I'm taking you to a spot today where Ossian is said to be buried, and I'm going to tell you his story. Ossian had become a leader of a band of the Fianna, the heroic warriors and hunters, freeborn men of Gaelic nobility. He wasn't given this position of leadership because of his father. He had to prove that he was worthy, and he succeeded in all the challenges and tasks that were required. Ossian was also a great bard and poet, the best in all Ireland. Perhaps no surprise, given that his father Finn had tasted the salmon of knowledge all those years ago. One day, Ossian was out hunting by the coast, and he and his men were unsuccessful that day. They hadn't caught a thing. But then, a thick mist rolled in from the sea. Not a normal mist, but something entirely otherworldly. And then, a woman emerged, riding a white horse with silver hooves and a golden mane. This was none other than Niamh. Her father was Manannan MacLear, the Lord of the Sea, and she'd come from Tir na Nog, the land of eternal youth, the land of plenty. As Ossian watched this woman emerge from the mist and approach the shore, he fell instantly in love. This was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, and he wanted to be with her, whatever the cost. Niamh likewise felt similar. She too fell in love with Ossian, but was more hesitant about their possible union. "Take me with you," cried Ossian. "Take me to Tir na Nog and let us be married." But Niamh felt obliged to warn Ossian what he was getting himself into. Now in Tir na Nog, time does not pass as it does in our world. Niamh told Ossian that if he came with her to the land of eternal youth, then he'd never be able to return to his country again. He'd never see his kinsmen again. But so strong was Ossian's love for Niamh that he paid no attention to this warning. Ossian only wanted to be with Niamh, and so he joined her on her horse, and the two of them rode out over the sea and passed into the realm of Tir na Nog, that otherworldly paradise where nobody ever ages, where flowers always bloom and the sun always shines. There's no war or hunger, only peace and prosperity. And they lived well. Ossian was accepted by Niamh's father and everyone else in Tir na Nog. Together, Niamh and Ossian had 3 children, a girl and 2 boys, one of which he named after his father Finn. But in time, Ossian began to grow restless. He missed combat, he missed adventure, he missed hunting with his hounds in the moors and glens of Ireland. He missed his family and his comrades in the Fianna. He'd been in Tir na Nog for 3 years, but 3 centuries had passed in Ireland. Ossian spoke to Niamh about his feelings. He explained he was homesick and just wanted to return for a visit. Niamh again explained the way that time works in Tir na Nog. "If you go back to Ireland," she said, "you will not recognise the place. Everyone you know will be gone." "I understand," replied Ossian, "but I have to try." And so Niamh gave Ossian her horse, the same horse that had carried him to Tir na Nog all those centuries ago. But with the horse came a warning. "If you dismount this horse," she said, "if you touch the soil of Ireland, you will never be able to return to Tir na Nog." Ossian understood, and so he set off on Niamh's white horse, across the waves and back to Ireland. When Ossian returned to Ireland, he didn't recognise the place at all. The land of his fathers was gone. There were no more gods, no more heroes, no Fianna, no warriors. Every face that he saw,
Not one of them he recognised.
As he rode the horse through his old land, his heart sank as he realised that things were far worse than he could have imagined. The mighty fortresses that he'd known well were abandoned and in ruins. Everyone he encountered was weak, timid and puny. Men were far smaller, both in body and spirit. No more did the old gods rule here. A strange, foreign god had replaced them. He saw in many villages monks and priests leading people in prayer. He asked passers-by what had happened to the Fina, but people turned and fled, not wanting to speak of the heroes of old. At last, he'd had enough, wanting to return to Tir na Nog. But on his way back to the sea, Ossian saw a group of men trying to move a giant boulder. All of them together couldn't budge it an inch. But this boulder was nothing to Ossian. He leaned across from his horse and moved the boulder for them with ease. But as he did so, the girth on his saddle snapped and he fell to the ground. Immediately, he aged 300 years. All the time he'd been away had hit him in a single moment. Niamh's white horse vanished and, just as she'd warned, he was now trapped. He lay there on the ground, a blind, frail old man, a shadow of the great hero that he'd been in the past. Never to see Niamh again. Not in this lifetime. Now the group of men that were there with him may have been weak and puny, but they weren't totally ignorant. They'd been told growing up all about the grand adventures of Finn McCool and his son Ossian, who travelled to Tir na Nog and never returned.
Before Ossian died, it was said that he encountered a very strange man, a man that, by all accounts, he didn't take too kindly to. This man was St. Patrick.
St. Patrick was a newcomer to Ireland, a man that turned many clans away from the old gods and introduced a new single god. He was hated by some and loved by others, and he was fascinated by the whispers he heard from pagans and Christian converts alike that the great Ossian had returned. Patrick had to see him, and so plans were made for the two men to meet. Ossian was given lodging in a house belonging to one of Patrick's followers. He was to be Patrick's guest. But there was no friendship to be had here. Patrick saw in front of him a man that undermined his new teachings and threatened to revive the old beliefs. And Ossian saw in front of him a man that was responsible for bringing ruin to Ireland. Soon, a theological battle was being fought between the two men. Patrick decided to start from the beginning, how the world came to be. He told Ossian of Adam and Eve and the punishment for stealing the forbidden apples. Ossian smiled and remarked sarcastically, "If I had known your god was so short of apples, I would have sent him 7 cartloads." When asking what has become of his father Finn and the brave men of the Fina, Patrick answered that they must surely be in hell, being unrepentant pagans. He told Ossian of the devil and his demons. He said this was Finn's punishment for choosing war and murder over his immortal soul. Ossian was puzzled. Why would those warriors be condemned for living honourably and bravely? It made no sense. Ossian remarked that if Finn and the Fina were in hell, then by now they've either overthrown the devil and his demons and are ruling there themselves, or they've escaped. "And what of my loyal hound?" asked Ossian. "Is he in heaven?" Patrick replied, "No. Animals don't have souls, and only the souls of the blessed can enter heaven." To which Ossian told Patrick that if he had acquaintance with God, he'd make sure that his hound received equal hospitality and food. Patrick then taunted Ossian, boasting that God could have easily slain the men of the Fina. Ossian, answering in the bold, warlike way of his own time, warned Patrick about his strong words, lest his son take his crozier and smash it to pieces. The theological debates between the two men lasted a few days. Ossian continued to stay as Patrick's guest, yet was treated very poorly. Ossian saw the meanness of this new faith reflected in Patrick's own hospitality. Patrick barely fed him. He didn't give him any new clothes to replace the rags he now wore, and there was no music. Everything a bard and poet was expected to receive was denied. a great dishonour. Ossian despised what he perceived to be Patrick's closed mind and intolerant mean spirit. Despite the debates and arguments though, Patrick did at least record the stories Ossian told him about his deeds and the deeds of his father. Yet, Ossian refused baptism, and rather than accepting Patrick's God's forgiveness, he told Patrick that he forgave his God for the way that his followers had treated him. Ossian died, old and frail, and was carried away by men who remembered the old ways and had great respect for the bard.
There are those that say Ossian isn't dead, but sleeping, much like Barbarossa or King Arthur. He lies here, waiting, and hoping for a time when Ireland once more returns to be a place of kings and heroes and magic. But until that time, this is where he'll be, restless. Perhaps the age of kings and heroes will one day come again. Not just in Ireland, but in many lands. Until that day though, Ossian will be here. You know, when I visited the Giant's Causeway, the place was spectacular, awe-inspiring. But this place, Ossian's grave, this place is magical. If you do come here, remember the stories of Ossian and treat this place with respect.